So I was asked to respond to the popular dialogue that's going on right now about this American football player who refuses to stand up for the playing of the singing of the national anthem. And I was asked, not just what I felt about this particular player doing this and his protest, but to address the whole issue from more of a First Nations perspective. How do I feel about the national anthem from this side of the fence? And so I know this is going to sound a lot like a Freddie Lee-ism, but this was a scenario where I don't really watch football, so I didn't know a lot about this issue. Somebody asked me about it, so I had to look into it. No, not exactly. Of course, I had heard about it. I'd seen some things online about it and this kind of a thing, but I didn't realize it was such a contentious issue as it is. However, last night, one of my Facebook friends down in Browning, Montana, on the Blackfeet Reservation down there, posted a photograph of his late son, who was a soldier and who died in Afghanistan. And he said, my son went and fought for that flag, and he's a hero. Fought and died for that flag, and he's a hero. But you, whatever the guy's football player's name is, I forget, you're just a piece of shit. So I don't know, I couldn't help myself. I had to respond, and I didn't mean to be callous, and I didn't intend it to be I don't know, I probably should have thought it out a bit more, considering that this is the guy's son. But I basically said that, why can't this football player protest both the history and the current relationship of the country of the United States to people of color. Why can't he protest in this way? Just because a bunch of 18-year-olds get suckered into going overseas and dying for this flag, And of course he got upset about it, which, in retrospect, it's his boy, so he needs this narrative, right? He needs to feel like there was a purpose to his son's death, and so there's no way I'm going to be able to this was the wrong guy to talk to about this issue. And he got upset, and he basically told me that maybe we just shouldn't be friends. And I said, well, if that's the direction you want to go, then you can go there. But I was a soldier too, so I think I was very patriotic at one time. So I think I've earned my opinions on these things. And but I'm sorry for your loss. And if you want to unfriend me or whatever on Facebook, I have no hard feelings about it, because by that point I'd already realized that this is a guy who lost his son, and I just basically said that his son died for nothing, which is my belief, is that his son was duped into the American nationalism the same way I was duped into it. I grew up I was born and raised in the United States. I was born in California, and I was raised in Western Oregon. And I was inundated with all of that nationalism. We did Pledge of Allegiance to the flag every day at school. You know, by the time I was 12 years old, I was visiting military recruiters, and I was planning my military career. No kidding, you know, and I followed that through. Um, I was very committed. I was very patriotic. You know, by the time I was in high school, like when I was 17, I was already like signed up for the U.S. Army, and I was just waiting out my last year of high school. And when I pull up to the school in the morning, you know, that flag would be up there on the flagpole, and I would salute as I walked in the building. That's how fucking goofy I was. How patriotic and goofy I was, and how nationalistic. And I totally bought the whole idea that that the United States was helping peoples around the world to basically to overthrow oppressors, to, to to gain access to freedom and this kind of a thing, right? So I wanted to be in the special forces. That was my aim, and the special forces motto is "De oppresso liber," to free the oppressed. And so that's what I thought I was going to be doing in the military. I joined military intelligence, signals intelligence, because there's certain prerequisites that you have to accumulate before you can go into special forces. And one of the most difficult ones is you have to get a top secret clearance. And by going into signals intelligence, that I would take care of that most difficult hurdle right away and gain my top secret clearance within my first year of military service. Then all I needed to do is get airborne wings and put in the time, right? You have to be like an E5 sergeant, and you have to have so many years contracted ahead. I think maybe 4 years or something like that. So basically, if you sign up, everybody signs up for an 8-year term, but you only sign up for so many active, and then you can do so many inactive. So I signed up for an initial 3 years active service with the intention of working very hard to get to that E5 in 3 years, and then extending my contract to make those other 5 years active. That would put me in the pool of people who could apply for special forces Q course, to go into the Q course and see if I can make it through. So I was all, you know, I was all going in this direction. In fact, a lot of the training, a lot of the physical training and mental training and stuff like this that I took on myself during high school was purposely to position myself for this down the road for special forces. But then I got into military intelligence, and when I was in school at Goodfellow Air Force Base training in signals intelligence, the first Gulf War Desert Storm got underway, and some of the information that I had access to through my teachers at the Intel school at Goodfellow started making me see things differently. You know, I was in class with guys that were special forces, and my instructors shared some stories that were top secret about some of the things that they'd experienced working in the Middle East. And I began to realize that some of the things that we're doing as the United States were not at all to try to bring, you know, that wasn't really the agenda, was to try to bring freedom. The agenda of the Special Forces in particular was to go in about 10 years, decade or so before the fact, and train the oppositional force to come, right? Train some radicalized group and equip them for a war that the U.S. would undertake against them in the future, so as to seize control of different resources, economic resources. I began to see things very differently, and in my training in intelligence school, I learned that a lot of the strategies that the U.S. military still uses to this day, a lot of the core strategies, were initially learned during the so-called Indian Wars, when the U.S. Army in the 1800s was, especially like 1850 and on, were fighting the tribes of the West and massacring, in many cases, the tribes of the West. And a lot of the things that the Army learned through that process are still used today in an ongoing colonial effort around the world. The U.S. is really now the big colonial force. I began to appreciate this only because I was in the military, and only because I was in signals intelligence. And I had a huge experience of disenchantment because of this. I realized that all of these stories that I had adopted and been kind of enculturated with as a child growing up, I recognized that they were false, and that therefore my identity was was false. Who I thought I could be in the world as a grown-up was stripped away from me because of this. So I had to look for a new identity, and what I ended up pursuing was going to find out what it means to be Blackfoot. Because growing up, I was told, my brother and I were always told that we were part Blackfoot, but I wasn't raised in or anywhere near the community, and so I didn't know what that meant. And so as soon as I could get myself out of the military, which I did several months early from my contract, I got out on a general discharge for the benefit of the Army. And I pushed really hard for a couple of years to get out. And I caused problems. But anyway, when I got out, that was my sole thing, was to pursue a new identity. Because without an identity, I had no plan for my future. I didn't know who I was going to be. And I couldn't be this patriotic American anymore. And in fact, the disenchantment extended. Even though I ended up in Canada, I don't feel any more allegiance to Canada than I do to the United States. I do think that some of the social instruments that we have in Canada are better than what exists in the United States in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of various social benefits. But I still am not nationalistic to any existing country. I now consider myself really to be more just Nitsitappi or Blackfoot or human, even Matappi. Just being a human being, which is something that has been long forgotten in the face of all this nationalism. I certainly don't myself stand up for any national anthem anymore, U.S. or Canadian. It's like if you've taken the pill and you've seen The Matrix, you can't go back, right? So, but I recognize that there's still a lot of people that haven't taken that pill, and some people don't take that pill their whole lives. And so these are the people that are very angry at this young man, this football player, who doesn't feel that he should be standing to honor something that is unhonorable. I mean, the only way that the United States became the world power that it is by way of massacring native people and enslaving black people. This is how the business was carried out. And even though, you know, the slavery was eventually abolished and the massacres, the physical massacres ceased, that was only after a lot of pain and death. And equality, you know, at least in terms of like just basic rights as a citizen in the United States, only goes back like 50 years. You know, for women, for people of color. 50 years is not long, man. Like, there's plenty of people that in their lifetime they didn't have the rights. The rights of every citizen. So it's an ugly history, and no reparations have really been made. Nothing adequate anyway. Nothing has been done to address that history and try to make amends for it with the communities that it affected. And in fact, you know, it still goes on in many ways. Like the colonization is still, we're not living in a post-colonial world. The United States is still a colonizer on its own land. Because not much of that land was ceded. And even when it was ceded by the original peoples, by the First Nations, even that which was ceded was not ceded with any knowledge of what the fuck ceding even means. That concept didn't exist. So I know what happened here in Blackfoot territory, which is a vast territory. I know what happened with the treaties. And people were just basically duped. They didn't know what they were, those chiefs didn't know what they were signing, what the expectation was from the treaty commissioners, the white people who were here to represent Canada, or down on the river in Montana, Judith Landing to represent the United States. Blackfoot people signed treaties on both sides of the border. In both cases were completely duped. And this is what happened to many tribes, those that survived. Pretty much everybody that survived, which wasn't everybody that was here. A lot of people died from the crowd diseases, smallpox and such that went through for the first few hundred years of contact. Just wiped people out. You know, when you look at what the United States it hasn't made amends with First Nations, hasn't made amends with black Americans for slavery. Police are still like gunning down black people left and right. And they haven't learned anything. Like, the same strategies are being used all over the world as were used here. You look at George Bush's shock and awe campaign. That was just learned directly from the Indian Wars. That's just basically a massacre situation. When they bombed Baghdad that night, you know, it was like, this is what happened here too. They would come in, and the army, the cavalry would come in and just totally destroy one camp in order to freak everybody else out into compliance. They would totally just kill everybody. And this happened with every tribe has a massacre story. Here with the Blackfoot, it was on the Bear River, and it was Heavy Runners Camp that was massacred, I believe in January of 1870. Temperatures like 40 below zero. and a lot of people sick with smallpox in the camp. And the U.S. Army, led by um, Major Baker, came in before dawn, started ripping up the camp with big Gatling guns and just killed everybody that they could. There was a few people that escaped, that ran off, were able to run off and escape. Almost everybody was killed. You know, this is the same thing that's still going on today with the U.S. war campaigns around the country. Why do you think so many people don't like the United States around the world? You know, why do you think you have these radicalized groups like ISIS and stuff that want to fight the U.S.? Anyway, kind of going on a loop here, but yeah, my opinion is that this football player has taken the pill and seen the Matrix, and he's not going to pretend to honor something that's dishonorable. And if other people haven't taken that pill yet, and they want to be patriotic and stuff, and they want to still feel like that flag is means something good, then they can go ahead and do that. But you know, you can't ask everybody to be ignorant like that. So, and certainly from a, you know, from a perspective from First Nations history and stuff, I don't understand. Like I do understand why Blackfoot people would join the military, but that's only before glimpsing that Matrix, right? Once you see it, you can't turn back. You can't ignore these countries, these nations for what they are, right? So to me, if a guy doesn't want to stand for that anthem, to me that signals something good, because at least there's one more person who's aware. And maybe he can make other people aware. Probably not, you know. You can't force that on anybody. They just have to discover it themselves, the reality, you know, of the history. But once you've discovered it, it's not something that you can erase and go back to being blind. So I think good for him. I think too bad for all the people who are trying to, you know, guilt him into changing his behavior just because he makes money, or just because you know, 18-year-olds or dumb teenagers are duped into going into the military and laying down their lives for something that's false, you know. Anyway, that's my perspectives. Yeah, it's my thinking.